Okay, hi. Thank you very much for having me today. My name is Seung-Hun Hong, and I'm working as an Associate Research Fellow at the Korea Institute of Public Administration. Let me share a screen with you. Give me a second. Okay. Yep. All right. Okay. The paper I'm presenting today is about South Korea's urban climate governance experimentation, focused on its capital city, Seoul. Yep. All right. Yeah, it's much better. My presentation is composed of 5 sections. I'll briefly introduce the background of this paper and raise research questions and methods. Then I'll talk about main findings and what the findings mean. I'll conclude this presentation with a conclusion and some lingering thoughts. All right. Some of you may ask, why cities, not national government, in the context of climate change? We are not saying national governments are less important than cities in this context. Cities are important because they are the source and at the same time, the consequence of climate change. Cities are a space where activities contributing to climate change take place. Cars and buildings are the main source of carbon dioxide, as you may know. It is also cities where the consequences of climate change are felt most severely. Moreover, cities are the source of innovative urban climate governance interventions, where climate change mitigation has the greatest potential for implementation and scaling up. When cities intervene, they seek to take a systematic approaches of trial and error. This is referred to as governance experimentalism or governance experimentation. When saying experimentation in this context, it is not our intention to call it in a pure scientific sense. Such scientific experimentation involves a deliberate testing of a causal proposition by introducing an intervention in a specific environment, random assignment of treatment in control groups, and observation of the causal impact of conditions and outcomes. However, for ethical and practical reasons, it's often impossible to use such randomized controlled trials to test high-level or large-scale governance interventions. So, cities often engage in living laboratories as a systematic approach of trial and error of novel governance interventions. In other words, cities are not involved in randomized controls, lab tests, or multiple repeat studies. Rather, the policy experimentation involves pilot studies, field trials, and participatory research. The purpose of this paper is to better understand the performance of urban climate governance experiment through an empirical study of the city of Seoul. We ask, what are the factors that explain the success and failure of governance experimentation? Before getting into climate change governance practice of Seoul, let me briefly go over what it means by urban climate governance experimentation. We reviewed the literature of urban climate governance experimentation and found that a combination of factors stands out at the core of such experimentation: intention, trial, control, and learning by monitoring. First, when carrying out an experiment, it is normally intended to act for long-term rather than short-term change. Second, an experiment is carried out as a trial of alternative governance interventions, processes, or instruments within deliberatively constructed sites for knowledge production. Third, changes are controlled purposively, though not by randomized tests. Fourth, implementations are monitored. After being monitored, measures and policies are adjusted and implemented again based on lessons learned. Whether urban climate governance experimentation will result in the desired outcomes remains an open question. Some say yes, while others say not sure. Scholars have turned their attention to the conditions that might explain the success and failure of urban climate governance experiments. It is still difficult to explain success because various conditions are intertwined and no single condition stands out in explaining performance. But we can draw out 6 conditions that affect urban climate governance experimentation positively when present and negatively when absent. First, supportive national or regional legislation. More autonomy and power given to cities, more effective urban climate governance experimentation possible. Second, the presence of a local climate champion, such as mayors or other urban leaders. Third, access to funding for climate action. The availability affects especially the implementation of urban climate governance. Fourth, multi-level coordination between city, regional, and national government. Fifth, intersectoral local coordination, that is, coordination between departments and agencies within a city. Last but not least, collaboration and participation. Collaboration between local government, citizens, NGOs, and business firms. Okay, we selected Seoul as our case study. Then why Seoul? Seoul is a good example of city government involvement in urban climate governance experimentation. There are mainly 3 reasons. First, Seoul's landmark climate change project called One Less Nuclear Power Plant. This is a project to save and produce renewable energy that is equivalent to the amount one nuclear power plant can produce in a year. This policy itself can be called a governance experimentation. Moreover, a range of urban governance experiments fits within this one less nuclear power plant policy, as I will show you in this presentation. Second, the one less nuclear power plant policy is touted as successful, locally led collaborative governance model that has delivered energy transition in Seoul. Its first phase completed in 26 months, half a year ahead of what had been expected. Third, the city of Seoul itself actively uses language to stress the experimental nature of the one less nuclear power plant policy. Now, I will briefly tell you about research design of this paper. Data were collected in 3 stages. First, we drew up a systematic control report to understand the context of Seoul's urban climate governance. Second, we did online search on a list of contemporary urban climate governance initiatives in Seoul based on 6 questions. I will tell you about 6 questions later on. Second, then we obtained data from our website, reports, series of interviews conducted from May to June 2016, follow-up email correspondence in 2017 and 2018, and direct engagement with staff of the Seoul Metropolitan Government. We interviewed 38 people, including policymakers, bureaucrats, property developers, architects, engineers, civil activists, and property developers. Interviews were carried out based on a semi-structured questionnaire, starting from questions to fill in gaps in the data, followed by questions to tease out interviewees' experience, knowledge, and assessment of urban governance issues and policy instruments of Seoul. The interviews sought to fill gaps and resolve conflicts in the data from other sources, as well as gain additional insight into the experiment under scrutiny. Interviewees were often involved in more than one experiment, and this helped to overcome the sampling bias of interviewees who were overly enthusiastic about their own experiments. The direct engagement with the SMG, Seoul Metropolitan Government staff, was essential in double-checking and verifying sometimes inaccurate and ambiguous figures and statistics. We analyzed data using a data analysis software, Atlas TI. Okay, let me turn to Seoul's one less nuclear power plant policy briefly. Among Seoul's greenhouse gas emissions, 60% come from building stock, while 20% are from transport. One less nuclear power plant policy has been developed by Mayor Park Won-soon since 2012, reflected upon the realization that low-carbon green growth, the previous top-down approach, was not suitable for delivering the objectives of climate change responses in Seoul. As I explained, one less nuclear power plant means reducing energy consumption and producing renewable energy that is equivalent to the amount one nuclear power plant can produce in a year. Seoul Metropolitan Government engaged with stakeholders to present energy transition strategies. One less nuclear power plant was Seoul's middle-out governance answer. It's not top-down nor bottom-up approach. By involving NGO activists, professional societies, and local government officials. In its first phase, from 2012 to 2014, 71 projects were implemented in 3 categories: energy self-reliance, energy sharing, and energy participation. The successful conclusion of the first phase led to the second phase in 2014, with 88 projects in 4 categories: decentralized energy production at the city level, efficient and low energy consumption by citizens, the creation of sustainable energy jobs, and provision of access to energy to underprivileged people. The findings. We looked at 4 cases that are core projects within the both phases of one less nuclear power plant. Eco-mileage, building retrofit program, which is called BLP, energy self-sufficient village, and no driving day. All 4 cases were initially introduced by the national or local government, later incorporated into or adopted by the one less nuclear power plant, and updated between the first and the second phases of the OLMPP. They represent unique experimentalist characteristic of the OLMPP, rebranding, revising, rejuvenating, and clustering of a set of existing and new urban climate governance experimentation. Okay, Table 2 here presents a comparison of the 4 cases. We summarize them according to 6 questions that I mentioned earlier. Okay, what is the goal of the experiment? What is novel about experiment? How is the experiment monitored by its administrators? How are performance of the experiment and changes to it measured? What changes are made to the experiment over time? When were made major changes to the experiment? Okay, 6 questions. I'll skip further explanation and leave it to you to read it through due to time limit. All right, discussion. What is interesting is that all 4 cases have the 6 conditions of successful urban climate governance experimentation I mentioned earlier, yet with different degrees of accomplishment. For example, eco-mileage and no driving day are promising considering the number of citizen participation, but limited results considering the achievement of program goals. On the contrary, the BLP and energy self-sufficient village show inverse performance pattern. SMG initially experienced difficulties in attracting participants, But once joined in, participants do comply with performance rules and help to achieve the experiment goals. In terms of experimentation, we have found the following 6. First, the process of developing and executing the experiments were partially open and collaborative with the participation of a variety of stakeholders. Second, citizens of Seoul showed a culture of obedient citizens, and when it comes to experiments, we could observe voluntary nature of participation. The Seoul metropolitan government expressed a willingness to truly open up, and citizen participation was viewed as a way of showing approval of this new stance of the Seoul metropolitan government towards its citizens. Fourth, what is common in all 4 cases is different approaches and incentives to attract participants and reward them. Fifth, there are also limits in the replicability of experiments. For example, practices and interventions developed in one energy self-sufficient village would be very difficult to replicate to another, owing to contextual conditions and the role of individuals. Sixth, all 4 experiments sit in a larger policy experiment or the one less nuclear power plant, trialed and experimented in ways distinct from those of the past. For example, Seoul's middle-out approaches to energy self-sufficient village, in which the Seoul metropolitan government facilitated citizens' participation by offering incentives and encouraging opportunities for mutual learning, saw fruitful results compared to the grand failure of the national top-down approaches to building green villages. Okay, based on these findings and discussion, we could conclude as follows. In what sense we can call one less nuclear power plant policy as urban climate governance experimentation? It may not be a true experiment, but it surely is a science-guided approach to developing and implementing novel urban climate governance interventions. This contributes to a longer trend of evidence-based policymaking, and we can identify the fragile nature of governance experimentation as well. Seoul maybe provides one of the most promising living lab settings for carrying out governance experiments. Since it is wealthy, it has a willing mayor, its citizens actively participate, and it is not significantly hampered by the national context. With all such factors positively aligned, however, Seoul has experienced modest results at best. This means that the set of factors identified in the literature appears to be necessary but not sufficient for securing success of any given urban climate change governance experimentation. Further, the governance of experimentation in Seoul was influenced by Mayor Park Won-soon. This implies that if not successfully sticky, the successful experiments of today may easily be reversed by the next policy leaders, who simply wishes to undo the legacy policy of her predecessors. And we will see how it goes with the new mayor of Seoul, elected a couple of months ago, who is ironically the predecessor of Mayor Park Won-soon. Okay. My presentation today is based on an article to be published in Urban Affairs Review. It's still forthcoming because actually it got accepted like 1.5 years ago, but still forthcoming. If you wish a photocopy of the original article, please feel free to let me know. And this is my personal website, so you can see all my works and you can download all my works from this website. All right, thank you very much. If you have any questions, do let me know. Thank you.